Many people who appear for, say, UPSC, they have a very idealized view of what they will be doing once you get inside. But when they go in, they realize, man, like, this is not what I signed up for. If you want India to be a bigger, better power, you will need to get our government fixed. The salaries that people in government get, that is some of the highest in the world. Actually, governments care immensely about what elites think. Think of it as an income pyramid. At the lowest income level, they have disproportionate influence on who gets elected. At the middle income strata, they have disproportionate influence on what gets discussed. And at the upper level of income, they have a disproportionate influence on what gets done. Today, governments still run more than 1,500 companies, including sandal soap and things like that. Our question should be, why are they doing that?
How did Underworld Mafia in Mumbai got created because of few infamous policies of Morarji Desai? Hi, this is Siddharth Aluwalia. Welcome to the Neon Show. I'm your host and also founder of Neon Fund, a B2B SaaS-focused venture capital fund that invests in the most enterprising SaaS companies coming out of India, selling globally. Today, we are going to discuss on public policy, the most hot debated topic as we are in the midst of the general elections in India, right? And what role does citizens play? What role does state play in public policy? I have one of the experts on public policy in India today, Pranay Kotasthane. Welcome to the Neon Show.
Thanks, Siddharth. Thanks for having me here.
And Pranay, you have been in public policy for a long period of time. You are deputy director at Takshashila. It's one of the think tanks of India in public policy, right? You are the co-host, co-author of Pulyabazi podcast, right? Which we all enjoy and listen to. And you are author of these two wonderful books, right? I love this book especially, right? Because it dives into the recent, episodes in public policy in India that we're going to discuss on this podcast right now. And the other one also. So Pranay, before we dive into the podcast, right, I want to make sure that our audience understand the basics or something. So, for example, let's start with what is public policy?
In short, public policy is essentially a study of the actions that all arms of the government do, which is legislature, executive, judiciary. So an analysis of that, the aims and objectives of what the government is trying to do, and then analyzing whether those methods which are used to achieve those aims and objectives, what are the problems, are they being able to achieve the goals, is essentially broadly, it falls under the realm of public policy analysis. So that's what we do. And public policy, as I said earlier, there was a lot of apathy, but now I think public policy has become a spectator sport, just like politics, right? So we already have chosen our favorite government or our favorite political party, and then we are trying to rationalize whatever governments are doing on that basis. That's what we want to challenge in our books, because public policy also has some framework, some core ideas, some ways to anticipate the unintended. So for example, every government policy has trade-offs. There will be unintended consequences, but governments often say, overall things were good, so why do you care? Like demonetization happened, right? There were a lot of unintended consequences, but many of those unintended consequences could have been anticipated. So that's what a public policy analyst will do, right? So not just say one policy is good or bad because my favorite government or my favorite leader has said so, but you will go deep down, understand what are the unintended consequences, can you anticipate them, and put that in front of the people and in front of the government so that the governments don't take you for a ride. That's essentially wrong.
And why should common citizens need to be aware and care for public policy?
Yeah, because literally the word public is there in public policy. I always say that. So,
but they have survived for 75 years without caring about it.
Yeah. So if that's why the Indian governance is where it is, right? Yeah. So if you want India to be a bigger, better power, you will need to get our governments fixed, right? What that means is, see, we are in the 21st century, but our governance is still in the 19th century, right? So the idea is, can we bring the government to today's age? That means several things, right? For example, governments are spending, our government, we have this perception that government is very big, it is large, but it is not so in India's case. Okay, if you normalize India's government to US's population to India, Indian federal union government is one half that of the US, right?
Okay.
So actually US is
You're talking about employees in government?
number of employees. Yes, yeah. So there are far more employees in the US government.
And they don't talk about it, right? They don't celebrate it. In India, UPSC is a celebrated thing.
Yeah, because we have weird sort of incentives, because once you get into the government, you are there for life. So the incentives are that.
And in
really
US, it's not that, right?
Yeah, it's not. There's a revolving door policy. You come in, go out, and you have a life outside that. In most countries, it is that way. But in some developing countries, we have continued with that colonial era mechanism where once you get in, cross that gate called UPSC and enter into the government, you're there for life.
Yeah.
And one more surprising stat, that at the lower levels of government, beyond apart from the IAS, etc., the salaries that people in government get, that is some of the highest in the world.
In India?
Yeah. So for example, teachers.
But government officers are complaining about their salaries.
Yeah.
They are not equal to private.
No, yeah. So that's what, if you look at IAS, etc., let's say IAS, if you compare with a CEO of a company, they will be earning less. But if you compare at the lower level, say a teacher, for example, in a government school, there are lots of studies on this where Indian teachers, government teachers, they are some of the most well paid, normalized to our GDP and all that. So the incentive is that once you get into the government, you will have a good life,
safe, permanent job.
Yeah, and that's why there is that mismatch of demand and supply. But anyway, so largely, if we don't care about the government, we'll get a government which is spread out, but not doing the kind of things it needs to do, which is health, education, public health, education.
Because they are not popular things.
Yeah, these are tough things, and
they can't be solved in 1 year or even a decade.
Yeah, you can make some changes in 4 or 5 years. So, for example, Indore has become a cleaner city
But that's an effort of last 30 years.
Not 30 years. I'm from Indore. It started in 2014-15, where there was a motivated civil servant with support from the state, and over 10 years it has improved significantly, right? So anyway, so the idea is we need to understand that if we don't ask the right things from the government, we will get what it is currently doing, and that affects all of us, right? It affects investors, for example. If our infrastructure doesn't improve, if our tax policies are poor, if our trade policies are poor, no one is going to invest it beyond just doing something because there's an incentive or a production linked incentive at play. But if you want sustainable growth, you need the state to do what it should be doing rather than the current state. So we have a term for this in this book called omniabsent, right? We call the state as, in the sense that state is doing what it shouldn't be doing, but it is not doing what it should be doing. And that is one thing. I often, from an expenditure point of view also, it is important. I always ask this question in my public finance classes. So if you look at India's economy, what percentage of India's economy, roughly, do you think is spent by all governments combined?
I read the books, 28%.
25, roughly, right? And what is it for the US?
38.
Yeah, correct. Exactly. 38%, right? We've read. So that is the mismatch, right? Like we generally think it's a capitalist economy. So US must not be spending such a part of US government must not be spending such a big part of their GDP in their government. But it's exactly not true, right? In fact, there is a very well-known result that as your GDP per capita increases, the government spending as a percentage of GDP also increases. So there's almost a very established correlation.
Pakistan is at 21%.
Yeah, the poorer the country, you will see they are lesser. But what's the difference, right? The US, the government, US or any rich country, government will be spending a lot more, but they'll be doing a lot less. So they'll pick up certain areas and spend a lot in those areas.
Focused.
Right? Yeah, where there are market failures. So we know, for example, that public health is something which you need governments to do because there will be a market failure. My actions don't have a negative externality. So in order to balance that, you need government action. R&D spending, for example. It is a well-established thing that private sector will underinvest in R&D because the gains from R&D won't accrue to my company.
Yeah.
So governments have a role in that spending. So all these are established principles and frameworks of public policy through which we understand that where is government action warranted and where is government action undesirable.
Yeah.
Now, that's how US spending is 38%, but it was very concentrated: health, education, defense, external affairs, R&D, right? These will be the big chunks. Whereas in India, if you look at it, we have 25% of our GDP, 2% of it is on defense. Around 4 to 5% is on health, on education, all levels of government combined. And then another 1.5 to 1.4% is on health. So this
Poorest.
is a total of 8-9%.
Yeah.
Where is the remaining, what,
I don't
13%
know.
going, right? So there's a lot of subsidies. Governments are running companies. Today, governments still run more than 1,500 companies, including sandal soap and things like that, right? So you have this idea that...
And the government is bleeding money on all these 1,500
Yeah,
companies?
they are. Not all. Some of them are profit making also, but largely they are in loss. But that is not the right question, because our question should be, why are they doing that? Because remember, state capacity is limited, right? The number of people in government are limited. The energy that they can devote to is limited. If you are going to take them and get them to run PSUs, they'll obviously not be able to spend energy, time thinking on healthcare, education, judiciary, where we have a big problem, law and order in general. So all the developmental arms of the Indian state are anemic, right? They don't have the capacity. So that's why we should care about it, right? If we don't care about this, governments will do what they have been doing till now, and it will hinder the progress that India can.
Well, let's say even if middle class, upper middle class, like people like you and me, keep on asking these questions, but we are not majority of the vote bank. Why will the government care about our questions?
Yeah, actually, governments care immensely about what elites think. Okay, because elite opinion is what drives policy across the world. It's not.
Can you give me example?
Yeah. So, for example, see, a person. There is a difference between policy and there's a difference between what governments do close to the elections, right? Manifestos, promises, etc. But if in any society, it is the elites who will have the intellectual capacity, time, energy to spend on things related to the government, thinking about what government should do, right? Because if you are barely making two ends meet, you're not going to be thinking of how the government's working.
I need survival.
Yeah,
Then.
Exactly. So your asks will be from the government to just give me whatever you want. It's true across the world. It's not unique to India. But it is the elite. If the elite is invested in that country, they will spend time on spending on their energy to improve their state, market, society, to make the governments a better place. And then once you have that in mind, then governments actually change policy. So we in fact have a pyramid. Think of it as a income pyramid. So at the lowest income level, right, they have disproportionate influence on who gets elected. Okay. At the middle income strata, they have disproportionate influence on what gets discussed, right? Because you and I are the people who are doing podcasts, reading op-eds and things. And at the upper level of income, they have a disproportionate influence on what gets done by the government. So this is a framework to think about, right? So middle we are actually amongst the top decile of India, definitely top 10%. But in general, if you say as with economic growth, the middle classes is concerned, will have a disproportionate influence on what gets discussed, what gets written in newspapers, and that moves the Overton window. Overton window is another concept which says that in a democracy, we have this idea that the politician in general, we have this idea that politicians come up with ideas and then it gets implemented. But it's not so mostly, right? It's about there's a window of political possibility. It's called the Overton window. So on any policy, there will be a range of opinions, but only some of them are politically feasible. For example, let's say you're talking about education. So saying that you should have right to education falls within the Overton window. Like if a politician goes and says it, it will not be thought of as radical and you're trying to upset the status quo. No politician wants to be seen outside that political window because they are democratic. They have democratic accountability. Finally, they have to go and bat for. But if, let's say, you say a politician says we should privatize entire education, that will be outside the Overton window. That will be a political suicide, right? So idea is that there are some things which are in the Overton window, some things which are out. But with public opinion, that Overton window can move over time, and that has moved, right? Whether it is on, let's say, LGBTQ rights, the Overton window has moved, right? It was not where it was in 2008-9. So if people are invested and interested in public policy, and people like us who will have time, energy to do this systematic study, then you can move the Overton window to get what you want the government to do, right? Understood. So that's why it's very important.
And how do you get government, like say, by doing these podcasts or writings?
Yeah, so governments have various ways of interacting. Now, for example, many of the laws or many of the policies are put into the public for draft comments. So every, let's say, Ministry of Electronics has made a policy, they'll put generally into the public domain for draft comments. Anyone can respond to it. You and I, we can just respond to it. There are many organizations which are trying to bring together people to systematically respond to these draft comments. So that is one way. The other way is there are standing committees that the parliament has. On each of these ministries, there will be an equivalent standing committee which will question it's a check and balance where the legislature will question the executive. That defense, for example, so there will be a standing committee of defense where there will be people from the opposition parties and the ruling party. They will ask questions from the Ministry of Defense that why didn't you do this? So you can respond to those. You can depose before a parliamentary standing committee. Then more indirectly, the idea is you just our theory of change is to just flood the system with good ideas. So at Takshashila, what we are doing is just write policy papers which make the argument to move the Overton window in the direction which we think is in Indian national interest, and let those ideas be there in the public domain. Over time, those ideas do move the window. We have seen it in many cases.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, for example, space reform. India privatized space in 2020. So before that, space was the domain of ISRO only, right? But we now know that you need a very robust private space thing. A lot of good things are being done by SpaceX and the likes, which are not in the government, right? So now some of us at Takshashila had written a document long ago which said that you should privatize space. We keep doing that. It's not as if the change happened because of us. No one can say that in public policy. But once this idea was expressed enough in many forums, many other people also spoke about it. It was no longer outside the Overton window. It became okay. We can think about it, and over time, the government did do it. It happens like even in 1970s, 80s. The fact that government should get out of the way and economic liberalization was outside the Overton window. By 1980s, it had already changed, and 1992 when the liberalization happened, it was not a radical idea at all. So many of these things happen when you are able to put these ideas into the public.
So what, just to summarize it, what you're saying is, you're saying the good policy that the government will make in the future or is making right now, these are the things that have been discussed over the last decade, and some of these things would have captured the masses' attention and thereby capturing government's attention that, hey, the timing is ripe right now to make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it might not have captured the masses' attention. That's the only correction I'll make. But it will largely arguments would have been made. So that's why, for example, Ajay Shah and Vijay Kelkar, who also have a very good book on public policy called In Service of the Republic, they talk about a idealized policy pipeline. How does a change happen in India? So first, they have around 7 steps. I'm not going to discuss all of them, but first step starts with having good data on that particular area, right? So for example, health. You should know what is the problem in public health in India. So first you have a good statistical system in place. The next thing is, once that statistics is largely accepted, then there will be the role of think tanks, and where you then propose ideas that, okay, this is the problem, this is the way to go about it. Some others will have completely other opposing ideas. That's fine. There is that intellectual sparring as a natural selection of ideas takes place, right? Just like in biology. So people will argue, etc. People will write in opinion pieces or discussion documents. Some of them ideas will go away. Then comes the role of committees. So from outside the government, we think of committees in a very cynical way, that government mein committee baitha diya, so change will never happen. But most of the changes that have happened in government are often because of a committee recommendation. So what the committee will do is they'll take all these ideas which are there in the either of public opinion, and then they will wean off some of the most radical ones or politically unfeasible ones, and then committees write reports, right? So this gets ready. Finally, when crisis happens, it's not as if governments come up with a new idea when the crisis happens. What happens is they'll pick up an idea which is already there, 2-3 committees have said, and that they'll pick one of those when, say, a crisis or one urgency comes up, and then the change happens.
Understood.
Right? So idea is, if you don't have good ideas in the public domain right up front, the crisis will never lead to the kind of change. For example, in health, COVID-19, right? COVID-19 happened. Did you see any change in our health policy? No, because that policy pipeline is not prepared. We don't have a good set of ideas in the public domain about what should we do of Indian health. There are very few ideas. But on some other things we had, like I gave you the example of space, about economic reforms in 92. That policy pipeline was already established. So that's why it's important.
So what you are saying is, people like you, me, and all the listeners of this podcast, we should try to create at least the policy pipeline, and some of them over a period of time will be picked up by the government and it will go in the government's pipeline.
Absolutely, yeah. So first, equip yourself with fundamentals of public policy, because otherwise we'll not understand what government should do. Once you have, then you can sharpen your demands, and that was one of the reasons why we wrote the book. Sharpen your demands, ask from a very systematic perspective about what government should be doing, and more importantly, what government should not be doing. Then, as you said, articulate those ideas, Overton window might move, and then change happens. That's how it is largely in most democracies.
And we have carried a lot on the policies, on the way a government operates from the colonial era. You have written about it. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So, lots of people have written about this, that once you transitioned from that state which was colonial to this state which was republic, democratic republic, at least the frame that was supposed to execute some of these policy changes was still carried over from the past, right? So just the fact, for example, in Karthik Muralidharan's latest book on accelerating India's development, he says, for example, why do we have this weird thing that government officials keep getting transferred every 2-3 years, right? All the IAS officers.
That was the reason that, hey, no government official could have so much power in one district or a region, so that they can continue to juice their influence by means of bribe or unethical means.
Correct. So, and the idea came from the colonial state. Okay. So the idea was that colonial state was not so interested in the development of those people. So it was, okay, you are extract revenue, and when you extract revenue, a lot of corruption also used to happen. So to minimize that corruption, you keep moving and you keep doing it. But your main role was as a revenue collector. That's why a head is called a collector, right? He's supposed to do development.
That's how the term collector came
exactly.
in. So, the DM is called the collector, district magistrate.
Yeah. So the collector is actually the revenue collector. So that was a primary responsibility. Yeah. And that's why you have a system where you keep transferring the... But in most of the countries which are more advanced, this is not how it operates.
Like most of the countries, like even Singapore was a colony, right? The other developed countries had been colonies. we don't see such an overhang of colonialization in those countries.
See, no, actually, in many of the post-colonial democratic countries, you will see similar
Okay.
challenges. So, I mean, Pakistan, Bangladesh.
No, they are. All, I think they are all parts of India. So or were parts of India.
I mean, yeah. So that, but many, even in Africa, you will see the same issues cropping up. So, see, what is difference between Singapore and India? Thing is, see, in India, we established the fact that there will be a democratic republic right at the outset. So that was unique, and you had a constitution which came into being, and it has survived. That was unique, and in the imagination of the people, they said that the constitution will be a vehicle not just for political revolution or economic revolution, but also a social revolution. This was very different. Political revolution, how everyone got a vote. Many states, even until that time, it is very unique for India to have adopted that path, that every single person had a vote. Even some of the European states also, women got a vote later. But India at the outset promised that. Economic revolution was transfer of resources from the colonies, from the colonial administration to people in India. Then there was also land reform, etc. But there was social revolution also. So the state became the primary vehicle through which social change also has to happen. Now, this has positive and negative aspects, right? Positive aspect is that, yes, India was a deeply divided society at when we got independence. So you needed something.
We had 400 plus princely states.
That was 500 plus. To get them together was one, but just the social inequities, right? The caste divides, the language divides, etc. So you needed someone to also the gender issues, right? So you needed to a vehicle of bringing change. So state became the primary vehicle. Now the positive aspect of this was that we've moved forward on a lot of those things, and that is genuinely a success that we should be proud of. But at the same time, there is also a trade-off all this. So the negative aspect has been that we thought of the state as being the primary provider for anything that we want to do, because it is a vehicle of social revolution, right? So you have to do everything that I want you to do. So you have to do things related to language, you have to do things related to things which can be done by the society as well. But once that happened, the interesting paradox was that the administrative arm was still colonial in nature, because the structure was still that way, but we added more demands from the state. So the state became more coercive, and we spread the state too thin, trying to do everything in our lives without building the capacity and its energy to actually make things happen. So that's where
I'll give you an example. I come from Meerut. It's a town near Delhi. So if you go to any MLA's house, member of Legislative Assembly, or any MP's house, member of Parliament house, or even let's say superintendent of police or senior superintendent of police there. I don't know about cities, but every morning they'll start with having a queue of people.
Jan Sunwai.
If this is not colonial, what is?
Yeah. So I mean, people often say that we are not citizens.
I'm talking about 2024.
Yeah. So citizens, not subjects, right? That's the paradox of this. Because you made the state so powerful, without the capacity to do that, the only way to get things done from the state is to know someone who can get things done for you. And that's why you end up with this idea that you need the state role, but the state can't get things done. So you get someone to know your influence. And
the common people there are sitting on the floors, and the executive or the politician or the policeman is sitting on a large chair, and the divide is quite evident. You get hardly few seconds to voice. You get a letter from somebody influential to give it to them.
Yeah.
It's pathetic.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's where we are, right? So that's the thing. Which, when I said we are in the 21st century, but governance is often in the 19th century. I would say that I would qualify by saying in all those things have improved over time, right? So if you look at all the data, the improvement is there across these, right? So education, gross enrollment ratio, for example. At one point of time, that was our challenge. Schools Okay. Now the challenge has shifted from inputs, outputs to outcomes. So now we are talking about learning outcomes, right? So it's okay. Almost everyone is now in schools. We have school buildings, but what are they learning? Is a child who is in standard 5, can they read things which were taught in standard 2, right? Those are learning outcomes, right? So the state has done something which has improved things, but you are also now questioning how much is that improvement, what is the next jump you can do.
But is our officials, the government, uh, aware of that the public policy which they have, right, the collector system, the Sunwai system, are they trying to break it apart right now?
Yeah. So there have been a lot of government committees. Again, committees and commissions are important. So they have done
But
work
you
on
are
this.
asking the powerful to make the policies to
Exactly.
take power away
Yeah,
from them.
exactly. So that's where what I was coming to. There are good reports on this. There are 2 administrative reform commissions which have analyzed this, recommended it. But see, the policy change. One model of policy change again is called you know policy window. Policy window. John Kingdon schema was change happens when 3 things merge. There is a policy problem. There is a well-defined solution, and then there is something which makes it urgent or something which is politically feasible. So this particular problem is stuck in the last one, right? Because why will the government change anything when you are the beneficiary of that?
Yes, it's like the government back in 1950s or 40s when we got independence, the government asking princely states to give up their powers, and they didn't give up their powers. It had to be snatched away with brute force.
Yeah, not in all cases. Some of them agreed. So in similar case, but again,
But there's how can like if given a choice to the princely state, if the government was not formed, they would have kept on operating in the same way. So you are asking the government to change, give up powers.
Yeah. So that's what. So that's why the role of middle classes and the elites come in. We have to make that argument consistently that one, this will benefit yourself, because even now people in government also want to do great things. Right? So for example, many people who appear for say UPSC, they have a very idealized view of what they will be doing once you get inside. But when they go in, they realize, man, like this is not what I signed up for, right? Because you have the same problem. Every 2-3 years, you are getting transferred. You are at the whims and fancies of the politician. If you are in police, you will. You are even at the whims and fancies of your district magistrate and all that, right? So now, if you have a state which is actually doing that, no one goes into the government thinking they want to do this, right? So many of them are genuinely thinking we want to do something good, right? So if you have to make an argument for in favor of the people who are within the government or who want to go into the government, that these kinds of changes will benefit them. They will have a more fulfilling career in the government. They will be able to do things that they really want to, right? Developmental outcomes which people care about genuinely, instead of just going and doing things by bits and pieces. So yeah, it's a tough thing. I don't say it will happen, but as I said, Overton window does move over time. There are countless examples, and we have to keep making that argument. Another surprising stat, for example, like, people often think China is a very centralized country, but actually it is extremely decentralized in operation. So a large percentage of their government spending happens at local levels. Our government is exactly opposite. Out of the 25% I told you, roughly 2-3% happens at the local government level, or otherwise it is centralized by roughly 13% at all union governments and roughly 12% at all state levels, right? So though that's the split, whereas in China it is a lot at the local government, same with US, etc. So now we have to make the case that you have to decentralize powers. You need people at the local levels to be able to decide their destinies much more, right? Mayors know what do you know who's the mayor of Bangalore? I don't know, right? So it's whereas those were the systems which work in many of the states. So anyways, these are the arguments for reforming the state that need to be made, and hopefully those changes will happen.
And why haven't we learned in the last 75 years that hey, we need to give the state or the city more power to develop itself?
Yeah, again, this is, if you look at it as a complex adaptive system, initial conditions matter a lot, right? In this, the initial condition for India's independence was that, again, too many divisions. You need a strong centralized state which will be able to keep the country together, right? So that's why the architecture which came up was this very strong union government in place. Even though we had roles of the state and all defined in seventh schedule, we all still had a very predominant, people often call it a quasi-federal state, or a what federal state with unitary characteristics and things like that. So that was probably needed at that point of time. But with over time, that realization should have come that you need more decentralization. Again, decentralization is also one of those wicked problems. It doesn't happen. Who will give their own powers away, right? But in some places, realization has come in, say, now state governments do play an important role. For example, one thing, again, people might not appreciate is 60% of all government expenditure happens at the state level. Okay. So, and a lot of the core things you and I worry about, health, education, law and order, the primary constitutional responsibility of them is for the states, not the union government.
So you're saying this budget is given to the state government by the union government to work on education and health? No.
Yeah. So there are two things. One is there is a constitutional division. Like, for example, you pay GST, there will be a SGST and there will be a CGST, right? So that SGST directly goes into the state's kitty. Yeah. So it's constitution. The union government doesn't give, it's their right according to the constitutional division of powers. That is one. And then union governments run certain schemes with state governments, like Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. So for that, union government gives some portion of the money and state governments give some portion of the money. But the implementation of all these is done at the state level. So if you want India to jump to the next level, if you want India to progress, you need strengthening of the states, of the union, of the local governments, and then for the union governments to do what it should be doing, which is defense, external affairs, etc. But so that's the conceptual jump we have to take. It has happened in China in extremely centralized systems where there would have been no incentive to. So it can happen in other places as well.
So just to summarize, right, what you are saying is, if we have to improve the quality of life of common people in India, the spending of the government should, let's say, go from 25% to 30% at least, or 38% to match that of the US. Because the percentage spend of the government is directly proportional to the quality of the life.
Yeah, I would actually disagree. Okay. I would say that that's the second step. That will happen naturally, because what happens is, once you become richer, you have more demands from the government, right? You will say Mediclaim, you have medical insurance, etc., and then government spend. So the real thing we need is, we want the 25%, which is currently the spend, to be spent on areas where the government should be spending.
Okay.
Right? That's the first step. So get governments to improve our law and order, right? That's police system is broken, our judiciary is broken. Those are the areas where you want the government to spend on. Then what are the other areas for spending will increase automatically later.
Pranay, I want to discuss a few things on the cause and effect that, public policy and the government, the state, has led to, and some of its consequences that took like decades and huge amount of like public spending, maybe billions of dollars. So the first case study that I want to discuss with today is, how did Underworld Mafia in Mumbai got created because of few infamous policies of Morarji Desai?
Yeah. Correct. So again, we need to think governance and public policy not as a linear system, but as a complex system, right? In a complex system, small changes can have very disproportionate effects.
The butterfly effect?
Yeah, exactly. Butterfly effect is an example of a complex adaptive system, right? An articulation of a complex adaptive system. So that's how it happens in governments also. And oftentimes we don't, out of good intentions, governments does something, there's large public support, but the consequences of that will be very, very negative. So that's why we say the way you judge policy is not by their intentions, but by their outcomes, right? So good policy and good intentions are very different thing, right? So in fact, some of the worst policies come out of good intentions. This is one example. So the idea was, okay, there shouldn't be alcoholism in 1950s, and there was this prohibition which came on alcohol. Right, so Morarji Desai was, I think, the CM of Bombay State back then. So he did prohibition of alcohol. Now, naturally, demand of certain things doesn't go away, right? So this is, people will get access to it in one way or the other. And once, how will you get access to it if it is banned? The only way you'll get access to it is someone has to do this in an illegal way, right? And that's how the origin of a lot of the underworld mafia came into being. Okay, and you first started with smuggling alcohol. Once you start smuggling alcohol, you have to put that money somewhere or the other, right? And you can't channel it very easily into the formal system. So you start engaging in some other illegal activities which encourage that. And simultaneously, after a few years, Morarji Desai also had, because that time we had foreign exchange issues, etc. So there were a lot of gold people used to buy and smuggle. So there was another ban on gold imports and very tight controls essentially on golds. So then the people who were doing this alcohol related things, they shifted, added new vertical to their business, right? Which was
they expanded their market.
To gold smuggling, right? That led to gold smuggling, etc. So, and then you had a very strong mafia created, which had, when it was a conglomerate with many business interests. And eventually, that's why in the 80s 90s you had this very strong Mumbai Mafia that we have had many movies
Haji
about,
Mastan,
right? Haji Mastan in 1970s, but then you had Dawood Ibrahim and the likes, right? So all that government action at one level created incentives for such a thing to emerge and operate. So,
but why did then this model or repercussions never happened in Gujarat, which has banned alcohol for a long period of time?
Yeah, no, prohibition always generates these kinds of actions. So there will be a lot of other things. Again, in a complex system, there will be other enablers also. So Mumbai was a big business hub. A lot of people were there. So the interests were aligned for this kind of action. But because of the prohibition in Gujarat, I'm sure there are many negative consequences, which you might not see at the surface, but you know that there will be some smuggling going on. There will be some people, underworld, some mafia will be taking charge to provide this to other people. In fact, Bihar also has prohibition now, for example, and many states have had prohibition. The learning from that has been that it doesn't work. It leads to all these kinds of problems. You need your state capacity, which is limited. It goes into policing for the thing that you need to prevent people from drinking alcohol, whereas you need to invest in literally policing, right? Again, I can give you the example of Bihar. After Bihar, Bihar has severe state capacity problem, broken at many levels. You would imagine that state would invest, if they have more money and they have money to give to policing, they'll give on creating a stronger police, a law and order. Literally, they have hired more people to enforce in the department, but to catch people who are found with alcohol or people who are selling alcohol. Now, is this the right use of state capacity? Right? So this is the kind of thing which has happened repeatedly. It will be happening in Gujarat also. And of course, there's also a revenue loss to the state, right? That is one source. But for example, Andhra Pradesh had prohibition, they overturned it. Many states tried and failed, but some states still try to do this and hope for a different result. Whereas we know that results will be similar in one way or the other.
So when did Mumbai lifted the ban on alcohol? Which decade or which year?
I don't know actually. I don't remember when exactly they did. But by 80s, 90s, there was a realization that this is not a policy we want to go back to either. So that change did happen. And subsequently, many states also tried and learned the same lesson.
Got it. And when Mumbai became the hub for immigration, because earlier it was Kolkata that was the hub of commercial activity, which was replaced by Mumbai. And when trading in black starts happening, first is unorganized, right? Unorganized I imagine the alcohol market and the gold market. And when the crime starts organizing itself, then it becomes a problem for the state.
Exactly. So then it became such a big problem that it threatened the government and the state government there.
And you don't know who is involved, either the police, the politician.
Yeah.
It's like a conglomerate, as you said.
Yeah, and it completely, I think that was one reason why Mumbai is not the most aspirational city for a young Indian today, right? There are many things broke in that period which Mumbai is trying to get itself up again. But again, another Mumbai story is the Rent Control Act. So again, Rent Control Act, we have written about it in this book as well. Again, good intentions, that rent control, if you put, then rents will be low and people will be able to live happily. But what happened because of that? Once you put controls on rent, the person who is building that area has no incentive to maintain it or build any additional capacity, because I'm not going to get money out of it, right? So what it led to eventually is a decline in available housing capacity. And because of that housing capacity, you will see now in many areas in Mumbai, there are, 50, 80-year-old buildings which are in a dilapidated state. And since the overall housing capacity or housing units are low, you will have very high rents.
But then rent control doesn't enforce there?
How will you? Again, government has good intentions, good policy, but if I tell you, boss, if you want to live here, you better give me this in black or in some other way, you will comply without letting the government know, right? So you need to have, if you have very strict controls, right? So things like bans, you need amazing amount of capacity to be able to enforce it without you going this other way, which oftentimes no state has. I mean, even US had enforced prohibition, then they realized it's not great, right? So these things happen, and then so that's the one reason why in Mumbai the housing rents etc are through the roof. No startup can literally think of having a great office in the initial period, and that's how Mumbai lost out on
Mumbai lost out economically. And the other story which I would love to learn from you is the sandalwood story. How did Veerappan got created?
Yeah, so this is something we call Dastanes Sandal in the book. So again, there is a Netflix movie also, right? I guess movie or documentary on Veerappan, and again that looks at this idea about what he did, or was he doing good things for the people in that area, things. But no one thinks about how it is connected to the state. Again, there is a very important role of the state here, which we need to know. For example, now sandalwood, around 90% of the sandalwood, the one which we want, was found in the three states of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu and Kerala. So we are actually abundant in this particular resource. And sandalwood, right from the 1700s, was an important thing. It is used for religious functions, for making incense sticks, not just in India but in China and all also. So there was huge demand for this. It was a precious commodity. In 1792 it was declared a state tree.
200 years back.
Yeah. So it was declared a state tree, that this is a
the British would have declared it, right?
No, this was during the Tipu Sultan period.
Okay.
Right? So out of good intentions, because he also didn't want to trade with the Britishers, where British was a colonial power, etc. But out of good intentions, again, you trigger a series of events like in the butterfly effect, right? So what happens with that is it became a state resource. So the trading with Britishers or trading anywhere stopped. That declined. Once that happened, then Britishers took over after 1799 Fourth Anglo-Mysore War. They continued to hold. So it was a monopoly of the state. You can't sell it, you can't buy it, only you can buy it.
And this is because Tipu Sultan made it state reserve.
Yeah, so it started with that out of good intentions, but this is how. Then after independence, you would have thought the government would change policy, but then again the new government also continued with it. So you had a fascinating situation where government is monopolized. So even if a sandalwood tree grows in your compound, it is the resource of the state. Okay, it didn't belong to you. In fact, any state, the forest officer would come and say that, if there is, I can give you 75% of the value I determine. You can see how corruption will happen there. Secondly, if you were found to be in possession of more than 20 kg sandalwood, you could be punished, you could be jailed. Okay, so
it's almost like a drug.
Yeah, so essentially you had all, and if the sandalwood went missing from your compound, you would be held liable. So you have a situation where it is a private property violation, right? So your private property's right over that wasn't respected, and you had all the responsibility to maintain the tree, but you can't extract any benefits out of it. Now, this is a classic thing when you don't protect property rights. We know from economic reasoning that people don't have any incentive
Yeah.
to grow that. So what happened is by 1965, India was producing close to 4,000 tons of sandalwood. By 30-40 years later, that had dropped from some 4,000 to a meager 600 or so. So what has happened is over the years, no incentive, right? Why will I grow this painful tree which government will anyways take away? And so essentially the production declined, and the only production that was available was in government run forests, which were
Tamil Nadu.
planted. Yeah, again, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Kerala, where governments were doing this. Now prices of sandalwood rise because production is falling. So what happens, right? People again, entrepreneurial mind will think that some like the Veerappan etc. was involved in ivory
Yeah.
tusk smuggling and all that. Then he added another line of business, which was that I can get more gains by actually smuggling sandalwood. So he added that, and then you have this whole cycle where you spend so much energy, time, and lives of people because of you've created this brigand, right? And the fascinating thing is, even like if you the Mysore sandal soap which you use, most of that sandalwood oil which is used to make is not grown in India anymore. It
Okay.
comes from Australia now. So literally you are importing the sandalwood oil from Australia, and you're packaging by a government run company, and you're selling it, right? Why, right? The question you should ask is why. So this is how state action actually created incentives for something like this to happen. So don't take away private property rights is the lesson from all this.
Or the role of the state is to build free market economics rather than trying to ban, control.
Yeah. So we put in government things. See, what do governments do? Largely, they can do three things in one classification. They can produce, they can finance, or they can regulate. These are the three things. Another way of looking at it is, we in Takshashila teach they can all governments do just 8 things. Okay, the 8 things are: one, do nothing, right? Literally one of the steps. Second is engage in rhetoric. So you say something, but you don't necessarily do something. Third is nudge the people, right? So try to change behaviors, like on your electricity bill, for example, they'll say, what was your electricity consumption last month? So that's a nudge for you to reduce consumption. The nudge, after nudge comes umpire, right? So government be trying to be a regulator. If that also doesn't work, then you try to do marginally changing incentives, that is taxes, subsidies. If even that doesn't work, then you drastically change incentives, which is making something absolutely free or banning. If that doesn't work, you might do change ownership. So what happened in nationalization, or the flip side of that is what happens in privatization. So this is a menu of 8 things governments do. Now what happens is, when we think of government action, most commonly people will think of taxes or bans, like you mentioned. The idea is, you should not think of these as the only actions. There are a range of other policy options, which I said. So we need to think of those from the least coercive to the most coercive, and don't think just of taxes or bans, because these, all of them have these huge unintended consequences that you can't think of.
Yeah.
Another example I give is how, and this Ashok Gulati, who's a very eminent agricultural economist, had written about it, how the MSP in Punjab and Haryana during the Green Revolution, minimum support prices, essentially you have an incentive to grow a lot of rice in water scarce areas, that had a contribution to creating the Delhi smog. Okay, so again, no one imagined that would happen, but when you have a very coercive instrument where you're giving a lot of money and a lot of incentive for people, also giving free electricity and water for people to dig that and grow something, you have.
And why did the government do that?
Yeah, so it started again with good intention, right? The idea was that earlier we were very short on grains, so there was this green revolution idea. It was again successful in the sense that we are no longer a food scarce country. I mean, at least in the grains part, we do export some of it. So it achieved that goal, but the way we did it was wrong. It was not just through subsidizing fertilizers and inputs. We also said that we will promise you a price for growing certain things. So it was called the minimum support price, which we still have, and agitations on farm laws are still happening for that, right? So once you made that promise, what will you as a farmer do? You will grow only that. So you started growing rice, you started growing wheat, crop diversification went for a toss. And once you started growing that, rice is a very water intensive crop, and if you don't get enough water, what will you do? You will dig from groundwater. You had an episode with Vishwanath on this, right? So you kept extracting water. You also had subsidized electricity. So the water consumption increased massively. So then what happened is in 2009-10, the government realized that, boss, water consumption is increasing. We have to do something like that. So the Punjab government introduced something called the Punjab Subsoil Preservation Act. Okay, their idea was that, a lot of water consumption happens in the summer months. Okay, so the idea was that why don't we change that by actually moving the sowing season to in June instead of May, etc., where the evaporation of water is a lot more. And innocuous seems okay, let the government do that, right? But once that happened, once you start doing that, if you start sowing your crop in June, July, by when the harvesting season comes, that is also delayed, and you have very little time between the harvesting season and the next cropping season. So once you have a harvest, you have very little time to actually get rid of the byproducts of that farm. So how do you get rid of that? You burn the crop residue. And when you burn the crop residue in a concentrated manner, lot of farms, everyone doing that within a 15-20 year period, which happens in November, December, that leads to one important contributor to Delhi smog. Right? So this is the causal event chain.
And when it was happening in May, so this is a 15-year-old phenomenon. This is not an old phenomenon.
Yeah.
When it was happening in May, it wouldn't have such repercussions.
Correct. So if you are doing it in May, if this would have been happening in a not in a concentrated manner, some people would be doing this in October, November, December, the effect of this would be spread out, right? Right now you have this concentrated thing that everyone is doing this in 15-20 days of the when the season is short, and that's how it leads to Delhi smog. So that's
what's been the farm agitation recently, the farm agitation laws and
yeah, I mean, again, that's a lot of different views on this, but essentially, see, farming is a very highly regulated activity in India. The incentives of it are broken in many levels, right? So as I said, MSP is there on one. So every people in Punjab, Haryana who are the well off are getting benefits from it. It's the same thing, the example which you gave of how will you change a policy when someone has vested interests which benefit them. It's the same thing. People in Punjab, Haryana are getting benefits, the rich farmers. So they don't want to have any change which they think might change this policy or have an impact on it. So there is a resistance to that. But centrally, what we need to think of is we need to move a lot of people out from agriculture to other sectors of the economy. Our estimates were that there are 12 million people who graduate or turn 18 every year. So that 12 million and we need to take excess of around 8 to 10 million from agriculture to more productive sectors, right? Manufacturing or services. But right now the incentives are such that you can be in agriculture and it's a low productivity thing, right? In across the world, there will be let's say US, Germany, if you see 1 or 2% of their economy will be agriculture and only 1 or 2% of their population will be in agriculture. That's how it happens because you become very productive, right? You have large farms, you bring mechanization and all that. So that's not what is happening in India. So there are strong incentives for certain concentrated groups to oppose it. And that's why whenever the government tries to change anything, there is strong opposition. There's a government fault also here because they didn't communicate the changes properly. For example, what they were trying to do is, in the first round, they were essentially, there was no change in MSP, right? At least they were just trying to make corporates enter, or for you to lease your farms to corporates easier. But that somehow rung an alarm bell because they were not taken into confidence, right? Again, an essential part of government policy making is to align the interests of people who will especially think they are going to lose out.
Yeah.
You need to do that. There's no policy without politics.
Yeah.
So you need to do that. That didn't happen, right? Suddenly there was no parliamentary discussion on this issue. Suddenly a law came. So people were quite skeptical.
You didn't undertrust enough.
Yeah. And that led to opposition.
Such huge wastage of people, resources.
Yeah. And the big thing is now no one is going to touch agricultural reforms for some time, even though you need that very centrally to change Indian economy structure. But now because of the breakdown of trust, it becomes difficult. So
yeah. Another thing that you mentioned is right, how India got left behind China in manufacturing. Where does it come from? What are the origins and cause?
Again, this lot of this complex system, many causes, so very difficult to pinpoint one thing. But we'd given an example of a policy where especially why India didn't have an electronics manufacturing base. So there are two parts to this. One, for example, we had out of great intentions, we had this policy called the reservation of manufacturing for small scale industries, some weird big name like that. But the idea was that some sectors will only to encourage small businesses. They said you can't mechanize that sector a lot. You will it is literally reserved. So you have the entire sector is reserved for very labor intensive companies. So for example, if you have machinery or capital which is up to 50% of your total cost structure, you can't produce that. Now again, initially with good intentions, there were some 8-9 things added. By 1997, this list had grown. You had more than 500-600 items, including electronics, electrical manufacturing in that small scale electric. So again, there's no incentive you will have really small businesses which won't scale up. And so there's disincentive for scale, right? You don't want to scale up. Don't want to introduce capital in it. So you will do barely, you will make ends meet, but you will not be very productive. Whereas that these kinds of policies weren't there in China, etc., which also liberalized some more earlier. Surprisingly, the last item from this policy was removed only in 2015. So there was, in some form or the other, it continued. But again, there were committee reports which said this is stupid, and that did bring the change over time. So this was one reason.
So all these 500 item restriction is gone now?
Yeah, now it is gone. So there's no sector which is only reserved for, and there was a fascinating study which we quote was done in 2015, that the sectors which were de-reserved, what was the impact on employment, impact on output, etc. And all those were positive. So the initial fear was, if you introduce capital into this, the employment will reduce. But the learning was actually that young firms create employment, not small firms. So once you de-reserved, many young firms came, and then the overall employment in that sector actually increased substantially, right? So that's the folly. We thought in very targeted terms that we need small firms, keep firms small, otherwise they'll go out of business. But what you ended up doing is that you created a sector which was uncompetitive. You can't produce things which match the world, and you fell out. That's one. The other thing we've always had this fascination is that we somehow think imports are evil. We somehow still think that. But imports aren't evil. Globalization benefits a lot. A lot of production is you import something, add value, and export. So a lot of East Asian countries did understand that. They had, for example, Taiwan, etc., had a very liberal trade policies from the 1950s, which people don't see when they analyze Taiwan. They say, oh, today it has become a powerhouse on semiconductors, but there is a causal change of policy decisions which helped there. that even China had changed its policies after 1978, but we had this idea that we don't want imports to happen. That also contributed to the fact that we were not integrated with the world. A lot of technology transfer didn't happen, and that's why we fell behind in a lot of these things.
Pranay, there are a bunch of questions that I have, bunch of discussions that I have, but it requires another episode of Neon Show. So I want to discuss more things in a second episode, like how did India manage the first and the second COVID waves, right? And how, for example, a policy making death in the second COVID wave could have been prevented. And we Indians have a small memory; we forget
Yeah.
very easily, right? And how the colonial experience made people inherently suspicious of both businesses and markets.
Yeah.
And that's why the state today doesn't even recognize entrepreneurs as employment generators, right? And lastly, like how did India manage demonetization? And when cricket and cricketers were hogging all the limelight in India, how did IPL turn in favor of the other sports? So the second part is due along with the conversation with you.
Sure,
right?
sure.
But the first part has been amazing. I learned a lot, right? On the nature of my Baap Sarkar.
Yeah. So that's thanks. I mean, happy to do this again. But yeah, I would urge your listeners to see there are a lot of good courses on public policy now. There are a lot of good resources, good books out there. So I think reading that gives you a sense that you're well equipped to then intervene in public policy discussions, and then we'll be able to push the Overton window to get the government to do things which will make India a more prosperous nation.
Yeah. Which would be the 5 books that you could say on Indian public policy, which could explain to laymen and make them effective?
Yeah, the 2 books are here. That I will definitely recommend. But there are many books, as I said. I'll recommend 2 books and 1 paper. So the recent book is by Karthik Muralidharan called Accelerating India's Development. There is a book by Kelkar and Shah which is called In Service of the Republic. And then if someone wants to just get a start, there is a classic paper by Devesh Kapoor called Why Does the Indian State Both Fail and Succeed? You know, why are we able to do things like polio vaccination and Kumbh Mela, but we fail in most of the other basic things? So it likes to look at this paradox. This is a freely available paper. I think if you are equipped with some of these books, you will have a good base of understanding public policy.
I think the reason why we are struggling right now as Indians in public policy, one of the reasons is our entire education system has been built for how do you get a job. And even the private companies that have come is how do you get a promotion in job, how do you skill yourself. Nobody has thought of, right? And I think it's not anybody's fault, but how to build an all-round individual. That has not been an emphasis enough.
Yeah, correct. That's why I think liberal social science universities and courses are very important. That's a weakness, right? And during our times of learning, the person who will do arts will be someone who's not gotten in an admission in any other course, right? That was a perception. But all these disciplines are very important for a well-rounded individual, right? An engineer needs to know philosophy, needs to know public policy, needs to know sociology. These are important elements to making a well-rounded individual. So I guess now people are thinking about that. Also, it is an endogenous function that once people become richer, we tend to think of these things as important. And India is in a developmental journey. Like one of the first US think tanks were at least 150 years old. Brookings, for example, is a big think tank. It's more than 106 years old now. So now in India, we are thinking of this. We are building institutions across India. People are thinking of these. If we are equipped, the public policy, there is a word public, the more we participate, the more we engage with the government, we'll get the outcomes that we want.
So thank you so much, Pranay. Looking forward for our next conversation very, very soon.
Thank you.